Welcome to Environmental Ethics, cross-listed in Philosophy and Environmental Studies. I'm your instructor, Philip Honenberger. I'm in the Temple system as J. William P. Honenberger, but it's the same person if you see each of those designations. My parents gave me 4 names, and it makes things complicated for any kind of official documentation system, an electronic database, and so on. But I go by Philip. You can find my contact information here, my email that is, and that's the best way to get in touch with me. You can also meet with me in person if you like during my office hours, or you can set up an appointment to meet with me in office hours, or even by Zoom if you like, or by a phone call. Just get in touch with me by email and we can make an appointment to meet in any of those ways. The syllabus provides a course description which gives you a kind of overview of the topics we're going to cover in the course. I want to just go through that a little bit now verbally, but you can of course read the syllabus as well. So a truncated version, slightly truncated version of the course description from the syllabus is on the slide here. I'll just read it out and maybe explain a little bit as I go. We start with some questions. What is nature? Does it have an intrinsic value or only an instrumental value? That is nature somehow valuable in itself, or is it valuable only because of its usefulness for some other purpose? Should we protect environments only for their usefulness to present and future humans, or perhaps protect them for the sake of animals, plant species, or ecosystems themselves? If we accept that, okay, so that set of questions is a pretty central one to the field of environmental ethics, and we'll spend at least the first 4 weeks thinking hard about those questions and trying to understand or trying to figure out what we think about them. So I encourage each of you to think critically with the materials that we read, particularly early in the course, about what you think our position should be on those questions. What's the why should we protect environments? What are the motives? Are they purely what are sometimes called anthropocentric motives? That is motives that have to do with the benefits of environments to humans, or are there also non-anthropocentric motives, such as the benefits of environments to other animals or to ecosystems themselves, the complexity of ecosystems, for instance? If we accept that human arrogance is at least partly at the root of the current environmental crises, what change to our thinking and living would be an adequate response? So if we think that it's something about the way that we've been thinking and living that has led to human-induced climate change that seems to be in a kind of unstoppable or near unstoppable condition at this point, kind of runaway condition that may have catastrophic effects. We think about the extinction of so many thousands of species that have been driven to extinction by human beings and their expansion across the planet, and their ways of interacting with their environments, humans' ways of interacting with their environments. If we think about all of those things, then we might say it's something about the way that humans have been thinking and living that has led to these problems. So what kind of thinking and living would be better, would not lead to these problems? So we have that question. And then what ways of thinking and living and what ways of organizing our societies would be adequate to solve the crises or address the crises? Okay. So these are questions that are not, the last set of questions, or the last question in particular, is not one that's addressed only in the field of environmental ethics, but it is of concern to environmental ethics in addition to these other questions. So in this course, we're going to survey some major debates in the field of environmental ethics. This field emerged in the 20th century, middle of the 20th century, in connection with environmental activist movements, environmentalism in a broad sense. And it's included an intersection with a number of, you could say, episodes or installments in in the environmental movement. So the environmental movement or environmental movements aren't just one thing. There are a number of different movements that are classifiable as environmental or environmentalist. And these have sometimes had a kind of theoretical underpinning, a kind of, let's say, there's been a philosophy behind a lot of these movements, and they've been different from one another. So we're going to look at some of those movements and their philosophies. That includes deep ecology, social ecology, ecofeminism, and environmental justice, and maybe some other things as well along the way. And then we'll dive deeper in really the second half of the course. So that will bring us through the first half of the course, wrestling with this problem about whether nature has an intrinsic or only an instrumental value, and the reasons for our obligations to the environment, and then and a kind of survey of these philosophical underpinnings of different schools of thought within environmental movements. And then after that, that will take us through the first half of the course. And then in the second half of the course, we will dive deeper into some more specific issues. One of the things we'll do in the second half for about 3 weeks is we will look at a short introduction to the field of environmental economics, and we'll ask so that field is famous, but also somewhat controversial. It's widely used, but also sometimes criticized. That's a field that tries to assign an economic value to environmental resources, and then sometimes becomes part of an argument for protecting those resources. So people will say, okay, this projected development project or this oil pipeline, it's going to have a certain economic value because of the oil that is harvested, but it's also going to have a cost in terms of the values of the ecosystems that are disrupted by the pipeline. And so when you tally up the costs, it turns out that the total cost of the oil pipeline is greater than the total economic benefits. And environmental economists, if they make that kind of argument, they lay it out in quantitative terms. They say precisely what's the in monetary terms, what's the cost of that project, and as part of an argument not to do it, or an argument to do it in a more ecologically sound way that will be less economically costly or detrimental. And some environmentalists have used environmental economics, but other environmentalists have claimed that there's something about environmental economics itself, the way by using an economic frame and thinking about environmental issues, they're already giving too much to the enemies, so to speak. They're already thinking in a way that leads to more environmental, that would lead to more environmental degradation. They're not showing sufficient respect for natural processes by simply describing them in monetary terms. So the full set of possible objections and replies about environmental economics is something that we'll have to get into in that part of the course, but I just wanted to indicate now that we'll spend a few weeks looking at that very relevant topic. That's something that's very much in use today, and I'm looking forward to thinking critically about that field with you in that part of the course. And then in the part of the course after that, we'll read which is the last part of the course, the kind of final unit for the last 3 or 4 weeks of the course. We'll read from a book by Keith Peterson, which will serve as a kind of review, but also a deepening of asking questions about some of the questions that have come up throughout the whole course, like what is nature, what fundamentally is human beings' relation to nature, and like, are we a part of nature? Are we ourselves natural? Like, in what sense are we natural or unnatural, and do we have a capacity for unnaturalness? And what is value? So when we say that we value something or something is valuable, what exactly should we take that to mean? Even when we ask about like the intrinsic value of nature, what should we take that to mean? Peterson's book goes a little bit deeper on that question, even than the readings that we'll do in the first few weeks of the course. And also about some interesting questions about, like, what should the role of science be within environmentalism? So sometimes environmentalists have been suspicious of science because it somehow was, science seems to be connected with human arrogance and with technology and with a lot of things that have caused problems in the natural world and our relation to the natural world. But science also claims to inform us about the natural world, and maybe is a very useful tool for being able to advocate for environmental policy and so on. So there's a bit of a tension there in environmentalism, and Peterson's book does a good job of helping us get an insightful grasp on that tension and what we should. He makes some proposals about what we should think about it. So we'll get into that in the later part of the course, in the very last part of the course, the last few weeks.